She ran the perimeter at 04:45 every morning. Perfect cadence, worn shoes. Nobody paid attention to the quiet nurse who never spoke above a whisper. But Staff Sergeant Hayes noticed things others missed. The way she counted sutures without looking. How her coffee cup always faced 3 o'clock. The half-second freeze when helicopters passed overhead. During the mass casualty drill, her hands moved too fast, too certain. Femoral bleed, sucking chest wound, traumatic amputation. Everyone else can wait. Hayes stared at her. That's not protocol, Bennett. Protocol gets people killed in the field. The room went silent. She caught herself, tried to soften it. I read that somewhere. But her hands never stopped. Field tourniquet, pressure dressing, pure muscle memory. That night, Hayes ran her fingerprints. Routine background check. The results came back classified. Level 4 clearance required. For a nurse. 3 days later, she was walking to her barracks when she stopped, tilted her head, listening to something no one else could hear. Staff Sergeant, sound the alarm. We have incoming hostiles, eastern approach, ETA 8 minutes. How could you possibly know that? The eastern gate exploded in flames. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Drop it in the comments below. And if you want to see how a woman who spent 6 years hiding became the only person who could save them all, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happened in the next 28 minutes would reveal exactly who Lieutenant Sarah Bennett really was, and why she'd been running for so long. She ran the perimeter at 04:45 every morning. Perfect cadence, worn shoes. Nobody paid attention to the quiet nurse who never spoke above a whisper. But Staff Sergeant Hayes noticed things others missed. The way she counted sutures without looking. How her coffee cup always faced 3 o'clock. The half-second freeze when helicopters passed overhead. During the mass casualty drill, her hands moved too fast, too certain. Femoral bleed, sucking chest wound, traumatic amputation. Everyone else can wait. Hayes stared at her. That's not protocol, Bennett. Protocol gets people killed in the field. The room went silent. She caught herself, tried to soften it. I read that somewhere. But her hands never stopped. Field tourniquet, pressure dressing, pure muscle memory. That night, Hayes ran her fingerprints. Routine background check. The results came back classified. Level 4 clearance required. For a nurse. 3 days later, she was walking to her barracks when she stopped, tilted her head, listening to something no one else could hear. Staff Sergeant, sound the alarm. We have incoming hostiles, eastern approach, ETA 8 minutes. How could you possibly know that? The eastern gate exploded in flames. The darkness before dawn tasted like dust and diesel fuel. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett's feet hit the gravel at precisely 04:45 hours, the same time they'd hit it every morning for 3 weeks. The air hung thick with pre-dawn mist rolling off the mountains surrounding Forward Operating Base Medical Station 7, and somewhere in the distance, a generator hummed its mechanical prayer. She ran alone, always alone. Her shoes were civilian Nikes, the treads worn smooth on the outer edges from thousands of miles that had nothing to do with fitness, and everything to do with not stopping long enough to remember. The laces were tied in a bowline knot twice over, the kind sailors used when their lives depended on it not coming undone. Her breathing synchronized with the rhythm of her footfalls. In for 4 steps, hold for 2, out for 4. The kind of breathing pattern that kept heart rate steady when adrenaline wanted to spike. When the helicopter passed overhead, her eyes tracked it automatically. UH-60 Black Hawk, 2 minutes out from the landing pad, probably medevac rotation change. The calculation happened before conscious thought, muscle memory from a life she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. She stopped at exactly 3.2 miles. Not 3, not 3 1/4, exactly 3.2, measured to the meter on a Suunto watch that had seen better days. The face was scratched, the band faded from black to gray, but it kept time with the precision of someone who'd once needed to know exactly how many seconds remained before everything went wrong. The shower block was empty at this hour. She preferred it that way. The water ran cold for the first 30 seconds, and she stood under it without flinching, letting it wash away the sweat and the dreams she couldn't quite remember upon waking. Her locker stood in the back corner away from the others. Inside, her nurse scrubs hung with hospital corners, the fabric creased in precise vertical lines. Next to them sat a locked metal box wrapped in paracord, the climbing hitch knot tied with the kind of muscle memory that suggested it had been tied and untied 1,000 times before. At the bottom of the locker, face down so she wouldn't have to look at it every time she opened the door, was a photograph in a cracked frame. She never touched the photograph. Not anymore. The morning briefing happened at 0600 in the medical ward's main office. Colonel Brennan stood at the front of the room with a map of the base spread across the wall behind him, blue and red pins marking locations that meant something to people who thought tactically. Sarah sat in the back row, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. The other nurses called her quiet. The corpsman called her competent but forgettable. The Marines called her LT as a joke, thinking it was short for little, not realizing she never corrected them because the abbreviation meant something else entirely. Supply convoy arrives at 1400, Brennan was saying. Standard rotation. Medical supplies, personnel transfer, mail call. Bennett, you're on inventory. Yes, sir, she said. Her voice came out soft, almost apologetic. She'd trained it to sound that way. Hayes glanced at her from across the room. He was 34, combat medic, 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. His eyes had the particular quality of someone who'd learned to read situations faster than most people could process them. He'd been watching her for 2 weeks now, ever since the moment she'd reorganized the entire supply closet according to a system that made no sense, until you realized it was arranged by trauma priority, not alphabetical order. After the briefing, she moved through the medical ward with the efficiency of someone who'd done this work before, but differently. The way she checked the morphine cabinet involved a half-second pause, fingers hovering over the lock before entering the code. The way she counted sutures happened in sets of 10, without her eyes ever leaving the inventory sheet. The way she triple-checked the emergency exit routes during her supposed orientation suggested someone who'd learned that knowing the way out mattered more than knowing the way in. At 0800, the morning sun broke over the eastern mountains and turned the base into sharp shadows and blinding light. Sarah stood at the window of the medical ward, coffee cup in hand. The cup faced exactly 3 o'clock, handle perpendicular to her body. Military standard positioning for quick access. She didn't seem to realize she did it. You prior service? Hayes asked from behind her. She turned, and for just a moment something flickered across her face. Recognition. Calculation. Then it smoothed into the same pleasant neutrality she wore like armor. No, she said, just organized. That's not how civilians organize. I like systems. He didn't push, not yet, but his eyes dropped to her wrist where the sleeve of her scrubs had ridden up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo. Numbers. Coordinates, if he had to guess, faded by sun and time. She tugged the sleeve down and walked away. At 10:30, the base loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing a mass casualty drill. 6 simulated casualties, mixture of blast injuries and gunshot wounds. The kind of scenario that separated people who'd trained from textbooks and people who'd trained in the field. The ward erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses moving between gurneys, corpsmen calling out vitals, the air filled with the chemical smell of fake blood and the theatrical groans of Marines playing wounded. Sarah moved through it like water. First gurney, simulated sucking chest wound. Her hands went to the patient's torso before anyone called out the injury, fingers tracing the intercostal spaces, finding the landmarks with the kind of precision that came from doing it in the dark, in the rain, in the back of moving vehicles while someone screamed. Needle decompression, she said. Her voice had changed, still quiet but different. Clipped, certain. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, 14-gauge catheter. The corpsman assisting her stared. How did you know the exact placement? Textbook, she said, already moving to the next gurney. Second patient. Simulated femoral bleed. Tourniquet application with one hand while the other maintained pressure. The placement was perfect. 3 inches above the wound. Tight enough to stop arterial flow. Loose enough not to cause permanent damage. She'd done it in under 15 seconds. Hayes watched from across the room. That wasn't textbook speed. That was field speed. Third patient. Fourth. Fifth. She moved between them with an efficiency that felt rehearsed, except rehearsals didn't account for the way she automatically positioned herself with her back never fully turned to the door. The way her eyes tracked every person who entered the room. The way she seemed to know where everyone was without looking. The sixth patient was the problem. Simulated traumatic amputation below the knee. Massive hemorrhage. The kind of injury that killed people in minutes if you didn't know what you were doing. Sarah's hands moved before the scenario caller finished describing the wound. Femoral bleed, sucking chest wound, traumatic amputation. Her voice cut through the noise. Everyone else can wait. The room went quiet. Hayes stepped forward. That's not protocol, Bennett. Protocol says we assess all patients before we prioritize. She looked up at him, and for just a second, her eyes were someone else's. Someone who'd made these decisions when the blood was real and the screaming didn't stop just because the drill ended. Protocol gets people killed in the field. The silence stretched. Every person in the room was staring at her now. She seemed to realize what she'd said. The mask slipped back into place, but slower this time, less certain. I read that somewhere, in a journal, about battlefield medicine. But her hands had never stopped moving. Field tourniquet, pressure dressing, hemostatic gauze packed into the wound with the kind of brutal efficiency that saved lives and ruined sleep. She'd completed the entire sequence in under 2 minutes, and when she stepped back, the simulated patient would have survived, if it had been real. Hayes didn't say anything else, just watched as she cleaned her hands and walked back to her station like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Everyone in the room felt it. That night, Hayes sat in his office with Sarah Bennett's personnel file open on his computer screen. Standard hire, registered nurse, 3 years at a civilian hospital in Seattle before applying for the contract position. References checked out, background clean. He pulled up the fingerprint scanner. Routine security verification. Every contractor got one. He pressed the button and waited. The screen flickered. Then 3 words appeared in red text. Classified. Level 4 clearance required. Hayes stared at the screen. Level 4 clearance meant DoD Special Access Programs. Black operations. The kind of clearance that nurses didn't have unless they weren't actually nurses. He closed the file and sat in the dark, thinking about the way she'd moved during the drill. The precision, the speed, the absolute certainty of someone who'd done this when it mattered. Who the hell was Sarah Bennett? 2 days later, a Navy SEAL team rotated through the base for routine medical evaluations. Standard procedure. Quick physical, dental check, blood work, psychological screening. The kind of thing that kept operators in the field and bureaucrats in Washington satisfied that they were following protocols. Sarah was assigned to the intake station. Vital signs, medical history, basic screening before they saw the doctor. The first 3 SEALs came through without incident, professional, polite, the kind of men who'd learned to be respectful to medical staff because medical staff kept them alive. The 4th one stopped in the doorway. Petty Officer Daniels, 29, 5 deployments, eyes like someone who'd seen things he couldn't talk about and wouldn't want to even if he could. He was staring at Sarah's arm. She'd rolled up her sleeve to wash her hands, and the tattoo was visible. Not all of it, just enough. The coordinates, the date underneath, the words that someone would have to get very close to read. Red Dawn, 2015. Daniel's face went white, then red, then something else entirely. His mouth opened. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. The look wasn't a request, it was an order. Absolute, silent, final. Daniel's mouth closed. He walked to the chair, sat down, let her take his blood pressure without saying a word. When she was done, he stood, nodded once, and left. Hayes had been standing in the hallway. He'd seen the whole thing. After Daniels left, Hayes walked into the intake room. What was that about? What was what about? Sarah was already sanitizing the blood pressure cuff, her hands moving with the same mechanical precision as always. The seal. He recognized you. People think they recognize people all the time. That wasn't thinking, that was knowing. She didn't answer, just kept cleaning equipment that was already clean. Hayes leaned against the doorframe. Red Dawn wasn't a Navy operation, it was JSOC, Special Activities, the kind of thing that doesn't make it into after-action reports. Sarah's hand stopped moving for just a fraction of a second, then started again. You should probably stick to medicine, Staff Sergeant. Intelligence analysis isn't your specialty. No, Hayes said, but reading people is. He left before she could respond. But as he walked away, he heard the sound of something being set down too hard. A metal tray hitting a counter with more force than necessary. The sound of someone who was barely holding it together. That night, Sarah sat on her bunk with the locked box in her lap. The paracord felt familiar under her fingers. She'd tied this knot in the dark, in the rain, on a rooftop in Mogadishu while waiting for extraction that took 3 hours longer than it should have. She untied it slowly. The box opened with a small click that sounded too loud in the quiet barracks. Inside, wrapped in a Navy Cross citation she never read anymore, was a custom scope for an M110 SAS rifle. The serial number had been filed off years ago. Next to it, a wedding ring on a thin chain. A photograph of a Somali village, the colors faded to sepia. And at the bottom, a single spent cartridge, .308 caliber, the one she'd never been able to throw away. She touched the cartridge with one finger. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words didn't help. They never did. But she said them anyway, the same way she'd said them every night for 6 years. The same way she'd keep saying them until either the words meant something or she stopped meaning anything at all. She closed the box, retied the knot, put it back in her locker. At 0200, she gave up on sleep and walked to the window. The eastern perimeter was dark except for the scattered lights of guard towers. Beyond that, mountains. Beyond that, people who wanted everyone on this base dead. Her eyes traced the terrain automatically. Elevation changes, approach vectors, dead zones in the sensor coverage. The same analysis she'd done 1,000 times in a dozen countries when her job had been finding the best place to put a rifle, and the best way to make sure nobody found her until it was too late. The eastern approach had a problem. The sensors overlapped everywhere except for a narrow corridor about 200 meters wide. If someone knew what they were doing, they could walk a vehicle convoy right through that gap, and the base wouldn't know until they were close enough to matter. She'd tried to tell Colonel Brennan during her second week. He'd smiled the way senior officers smiled at contractors who forgot their place. Respectfully, Colonel, the eastern approach has dead zones in the sensor coverage. If someone wanted to stage an assault, that's where they'd come from. Respectfully, Lieutenant, stick to bedpans. We've got professionals handling security. She'd nodded, said thank you, sir, went back to changing IV bags and pretending she didn't notice things that could get people killed. But at night, she pulled out her laptop and looked at satellite imagery. Commercial access, nothing classified. Just the kind of thing anyone could buy if they knew where to look and didn't mind spending money they probably shouldn't spend on obsessions they definitely shouldn't have. She marked the eastern approach in red, noted the elevation, calculated the most likely staging areas, drew probable routes of advance. Then she closed the laptop and reminded herself that this wasn't her problem anymore. She'd stopped being the person who solved these problems when she'd put the rifle down and picked up a stethoscope. That was the deal she'd made with herself. No more shooting, no more killing, just healing, just saving lives to balance the scales that would never actually balance no matter how many people she saved. Day 19 started the same as the previous 18. Run at 0445, shower at 0515, briefing at 0600. The routine was supposed to be comforting, supposed to prove that she was someone else now, someone normal, someone who didn't wake up with the taste of copper in her mouth and the weight of choices she couldn't undo pressing against her chest. But at 10:30 the routine broke. The loudspeaker crackled. Mass casualty drill, all personnel to stations, 6 patients, mixed injuries, simulated IED blast with secondary small arms fire, the kind of scenario that happened 3 times a week in real life and killed people who froze or panicked or didn't know the difference between textbook medicine and field medicine. The ward filled with controlled chaos, nurses shouting vitals, corpsmen moving gurneys, the theatrical casualties groaning on cue. Sarah moved through it like she'd been born to it. Her hands found injuries before her eyes confirmed them. Sucking chest wound on patient 1. Needle decompression completed while the scenario caller was still describing the wound. Femoral bleed on patient 2. Tourniquet placed 3 inches above the injury with perfect tension. Traumatic amputation on patient 3. Hemostatic gauze, pressure, field dressing. The kind of sequence that took most people 5 minutes and took her 90 seconds. She was on patient 4 when Hayes spoke up from across the room. "Bennett, you're prioritizing wrong. Protocol says we assess everyone before we start treatment." She didn't look up, didn't slow down, just kept working on the patient in front of her with hands that had done this too many times to count. Femoral bleed, sucking chest wound, traumatic amputation. Everyone else can wait. The room went quiet. Even the fake casualties stopped groaning. Hayes stepped closer. "That's not protocol." Now she looked up. Her eyes were different, harder. The eyes of someone who'd watched protocol kill people and had stopped following it right around the time she realized survival mattered more than regulations. "Protocol gets people killed in the field." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Sarah seemed to realize what she'd done. The hardness in her eyes flickered, softened. The mask slipped back into place, but everyone had seen what was underneath. "I mean, I read that in a journal about combat medicine, battlefield triage." But her hands told a different story. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from doing this when the blood was real and the screaming didn't stop and the helicopter extraction was still 20 minutes out and people were dying faster than you could save them. She finished patient 4, moved to patient 5, completed the entire drill in half the time it should have taken, with twice the efficiency anyone expected from a contract nurse who'd been on base for less than a month. When it was over, she cleaned her hands and went back to her station like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Everyone in that room had seen it. Hayes waited until the end of shift to run the fingerprint check. He told himself it was routine, just standard security protocol, nothing personal. The scanner beeped. Processing, matching, cross-referencing against the federal database that was supposed to have everyone who'd ever worked for the government in any capacity. The screen flickered. Classified. Level 4 clearance required. Hayes stared at the red text. Level 4 wasn't standard. Level 4 was special access programs, black operations, the kind of clearance that got slapped on people who did things the government needed done but couldn't acknowledge. The kind of clearance nurses didn't have, unless they weren't nurses. He closed the program and sat in the dark, thinking about the way she moved, the way she spoke when she forgot to soften her voice, the way her hands knew things they shouldn't know. Who the hell was Sarah Bennett, and what was she running from? The answer started to reveal itself 2 days later when the Navy SEALs came through for medical screening. Petty Officer Daniels walked into the intake room, saw Sarah's tattoo, and went pale. The coordinates, the date, the operation name that wasn't supposed to exist in official records. Red Dawn 2015. His eyes went wide, his mouth open. Sarah's gaze locked onto his. The look wasn't a request, it was a command, silent, absolute. The kind of look that came from someone who'd given orders that meant life or death and expected them to be followed without question. Daniel's mouth closed. He sat down, let her take his vitals. Left without saying a word. But Hayes had seen it, the recognition, the shock, the understanding. After Daniels left, Hayes confronted her. He knew you. People make mistakes. That wasn't a mistake, that was recognition. She didn't answer, just kept sanitizing equipment. Red Dawn was JSOC, Kunar Valley, 2015. 12 SEALs pinned down by coordinated ambush. Someone pulled them out. Someone who could shoot and operate and keep people alive under fire. Sarah's hand stopped moving, just for a second, then continued. You should stick to medicine, Staff Sergeant. But her voice had changed. The softness was gone. What remained was something else, something that sounded like warning. Hayes left, but he'd seen enough. That night, Sarah opened the locked box again. The Navy Cross citation, the wedding ring, the photograph of the village, the spent cartridge that represented everything she'd tried to leave behind. She touched the cartridge. I'm sorry. The words echoed in the empty barracks, meaningless, insufficient. The same apology she'd been making for 6 years to a boy who couldn't hear her anymore. She closed the box, locked it, lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. At 0200, she gave up on sleep and walked to the window. The eastern perimeter was dark. The sensor grid flickered its regular pattern. Everything looked normal, except it wasn't. Her eyes traced the terrain, the dead zone, the approach corridor, the elevation that would hide vehicle movement until it was too late. She'd warned them. They hadn't listened. And now, standing at the window in the pre-dawn darkness of day 21, she heard something that made her blood go cold. Engines, synchronized, moving in formation. She counted them by sound alone. 6 vehicles, heavy, coordinated movement, not civilian, not friendly. The sound was still 8 minutes out, maybe 9, but it was coming, and it was coming from exactly where she'd said it would. Hayes was walking past her barracks, night rounds, standard procedure. She opened the door. Staff Sergeant. He turned, saw her face. Something in her expression made him straighten. We need to evacuate the hospital. What? Her voice had changed completely. No softness, no hesitation, pure command. Sound the alarm. We have incoming hostiles. Eastern approach. ETA 8 minutes. Hayes stared at her. How could you possibly know that? She opened her mouth to answer. The eastern gate exploded in a ball of fire that turned night into day. If this story made you think about the people in your life who carry more than they show, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're wondering what happens when 6 years of running ends in 28 minutes of truth, stay with us, because Sarah Bennett's cover just shattered, and what comes next will change everything. The explosion tore through the eastern gate with a sound that turned the desert night into screaming metal and burning fuel. The shockwave hit the barracks hard enough to rattle the windows, and in the half-second of silence that followed, Sarah Bennett stopped being a nurse. Hayes saw it happen, watched the transformation like someone flipping a switch. Her shoulders squared, her spine straightened. The softness in her eyes evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating and utterly focused. Get inside, she said, not asked, commanded. Hayes didn't move. What the hell is happening? Professional assault, coordinated breach. They've disabled the eastern sensor grid, and they're coming through the dead zone I warned Colonel Brennan about 3 weeks ago. Her voice had changed completely, clipped, military. the voice of someone who'd given orders in situations where hesitation meant body bags. 6 vehicles, probably 12 to 15 hostiles, maybe more. They're using suppression fire to cover the breach, and they'll be at the medical wing in approximately 7 minutes. Hayes stared at her. How do you know all that? Because it's what I would do. The base alarm finally started screaming. Too late. The assault was already inside the wire. Sarah was moving before the alarm finished its first rotation. Not running, moving with purpose, low, efficient, using angles of cover that most people wouldn't even notice. Hayes followed because his body made the decision before his brain caught up. The medical ward was chaos. Nurses scrambling, patients sitting up in beds, eyes wide with the particular fear of people who knew what explosions meant in this part of the world. Corman grabbing gear with shaking hands. Sarah walked through the middle of it like the eye of a hurricane. Listen up, her voice cut through the panic. Everyone turned. We're evacuating to the secondary bunker. Priority patients first. Walking wounded help each other. Corman Miller, you're on point. Hayes, you're rear guard. Move now. Corman Miller blinked. You don't have authority to give orders. I have the authority that comes from being the only person in this room who's done this before, when people were actually dying. She locked eyes with him. You can file a complaint later. Right now you move or people die. Choose. Miller moved. The evacuation started with the kind of controlled chaos that only happened when someone who knew what they were doing took command. Sarah directed traffic like she'd been doing it her whole life. Patients on gurneys moving in order of medical priority. Walking wounded forming a protective cordon. Corman carrying supplies in tactical load order that had nothing to do with medical protocol and everything to do with what you actually needed when everything went wrong. Hayes watched her work. The precision, the certainty, the absolute absence of hesitation. This wasn't a nurse playing soldier. This was a soldier playing nurse. The sound of gunfire erupted from the eastern perimeter. Automatic weapons, heavy caliber, professional fire discipline, short controlled bursts, not spray and pray. These weren't insurgents. These were contractors, mercenaries, people who got paid to be good at killing. Sarah's head tilted slightly, listening, calculating. They're executing a 3-phase assault: breach and suppress, clear and secure, extract and exfil. Which means they're not here to kill everyone. They're here for someone specific. Colonel Brennan came around the corner at a run, pistol in hand, face flushed. Bennett, what the hell do you think you're doing? Saving lives, sir, which is what you hired me to do. I didn't hire you to give orders to my men. No. She turned to face him fully, and for the first time since Hayes had met her, there was no apology in her posture. You hired me to change bedpans and keep my mouth shut. But right now your base is under coordinated assault by professional hostiles who knew exactly where your sensor blind spot was. The medical wing is their secondary target after they secure the command post. We have maybe 5 minutes before they breach this building. So you can either help me evacuate these patients, or you can stand here arguing about chain of command while people die. Your choice, Colonel. Brennan's face went red, then purple, then something else as the sound of gunfire got closer and the reality of the situation overrode his ego. What do you need? I need you to help Staff Sergeant Hayes establish a defensive perimeter at the bunker entrance. I need someone to get on the radio and call for QRF and air support. And I need everyone in this building to move faster. She was already walking away before he could respond, moving toward the sound of gunfire instead of away from it. Hayes grabbed her arm. Where are you going? To get something I left in my locker. Are you insane? They're coming from that direction. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. Her eyes were completely calm. Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your concern, but I spent 6 years running from who I used to be, and it didn't work. So right now I'm going to get the one thing that might keep everyone in this building alive. You can either let go of my arm or you can come with me, but you don't get to stop me. He let go. She disappeared into the smoke. Hayes turned back to the evacuation. Patients still moving. Corpsmen still working. But everyone had seen the exchange. Everyone had questions written on their faces that they didn't have time to ask. 2 minutes later, 4 hostiles breached the medical ward's main entrance. They came through the door with professional precision. Staggered entry, overlapping fields of fire, body armor and night vision, and weapons that cost more than most people made in a year. The kind of gear that said these men got paid very well to be very good at violence. The lead hostile swept his rifle across the room. Empty. The evacuation had worked. He signaled his team. 2 moved left toward the patient rooms. 1 moved right toward the pharmacy. The lead hostile moved center toward the supply closet. That's when Sarah stepped out from behind the medical cart. She was holding a fire extinguisher. The lead hostile had maybe half a second to register that something was wrong before she swung the extinguisher into his temple with the kind of force that came from knowing exactly how much pressure it took to cause a concussion without killing. He dropped like someone cut his strings. Sarah was already moving. She dropped the extinguisher, dove for the fallen rifle, hit the ground rolling, came up in a crouch with the weapon shouldered and her finger on the trigger and her breathing controlled, and every single movement precise as surgery. The hostile to her left turned, too slow. She put 2 rounds through the exact point where his chest plate and shoulder guard overlapped. 3-inch gap. The kind of target that required you to know body armor architecture better than most soldiers ever would. He went down. The hostile to her right froze for just a second. Fatal hesitation. She used the falling body of hostile number 2 as cover. Closed the distance. Disarmed hostile number 3 with a joint lock that broke his elbow at an angle elbows weren't designed to bend. He screamed. She didn't stop. Took his rifle. Spun. Put 3 rounds into hostile number 4 through the gap between helmet and vest. Center spine. Instant incapacitation. Total elapsed time from first movement to last shot. 4.8 seconds. The room went absolutely silent. Then a Marine who'd been hiding behind a gurney whispered, "Jesus Christ, who the hell are you?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already checking the bodies, removing magazines, clearing chambers, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from doing this so many times it had become muscle memory. Hayes came around the corner at a run, pistol drawn, and stopped dead. 4 hostiles down. Sarah standing in the middle of them, rifle in hands, not a scratch on her, breathing steady. "Bennett, what did you just do?" She looked up. Her eyes were different now. No more hiding, no more softness. Just the cold calculation of someone who'd been doing math with human lives for longer than she wanted to remember. "I neutralized 4 hostiles who were about to execute a building clearing operation that would have resulted in civilian casualties." She ejected the magazine from the rifle, checked the round count, reloaded with a magazine from one of the fallen hostiles. "There are at least 8 more outside, probably more. They're using a standard 3-tier assault pattern, which means they have a command element coordinating from a standoff position. If we're going to survive the next 15 minutes, we need to disrupt their command structure." Hayes just stared. "You're not a nurse." "Right now, I'm whatever keeps people alive." She moved past him toward the exit. Hayes grabbed her shoulder. "I know who you are." She stopped, didn't turn around. "That tattoo, Red Dawn, Kunar Valley, 2015. I was there. Marine Force Recon attached to SEAL Team 6 for a joint operation. We got hit by a coordinated ambush. 12 SEALs pinned down in a kill zone, bleeding out. No medevac possible. No reinforcements coming." His voice had gone quiet, remembering. "Someone came out of nowhere, lone operator, medic attached to CIA Special Activities Division. She kept every single one of those SEALs alive while calling in danger close fire support. Operated and shot at the same time. The SEALs called her the Angel of Death because she could kill you or save you depending on what you needed." Sarah's shoulders tightened. Hayes continued. "She received the Navy Cross for that action. First woman ever attached to SEAL Team 6. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bennett. And then she disappeared, just dropped off the grid. Nobody knew what happened to her. Silence. That was 6 years ago, Staff Sergeant. What's your real name? Sarah turned. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 6 years of hiding and 3 weeks of pretending and 4.8 seconds of remembering exactly who she used to be. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bennett, trauma surgeon, Special Amphibious Reconnaissance Corpsman, SEAL Team 6, Special Activities Division, Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart. She paused. And 73 confirmed kills that I've spent 6 years trying to forget. Behind them, a Marine dropped his rifle in shock. The sound of the weapon hitting the floor echoed in the sudden silence. Sarah didn't wait for questions. She was already moving toward her barracks. Hayes followed because nothing else made sense anymore. Her locker stood open. The locked box sat on her bunk, paracord unwrapped, lid open for the first time in front of another person. Inside, wrapped in a Navy Cross citation, was a custom scope for an M110 SAS rifle. Sarah lifted it carefully. Her hands remembered the weight, the balance, the particular feel of this specific piece of equipment that had been with her through 17 operations and 73 decisions she couldn't take back. "What are you doing?" Hayes asked. "What I should have done the moment I heard those engines." She pulled an M110 from the rifle rack, standard issue. She'd checked its serial number her second day on base and made sure it was properly maintained, even though she'd sworn she'd never touch one again. They're using professional tactics, which means they have trained leadership. Take out the leadership and the assault falls apart. She mounted the scope with movements she'd done 1,000 times. Muscle memory that 6 years of nursing hadn't erased. Colonel Brennan appeared in the doorway, saw the rifle, saw the scope, saw Sarah's face and the absolute certainty in her movements. "Commander, what exactly are you planning to do?" She looked up, met his eyes. No apology, no hesitation. "I'm planning to dismantle their command structure one shot at a time until air support arrives or they break contact, whichever comes first." "That's not your job." "Sir, with respect, my job is to preserve life. Sometimes that means healing. Sometimes that means eliminating the people who are trying to end lives. Right now it means the second one." She moved past him toward the exit. Brennan grabbed her arm. "I didn't give you permission to engage." Sarah stopped. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but absolutely firm. "Colonel, I've been taking lives and saving lives in war zones since before you took command of this base. I've operated in 12 countries under 4 different flags, doing things that never made it into official reports. I know what I'm doing. And right now what I'm doing is the only thing standing between those people in the bunker and a massacre. So you can either help me or get out of my way. But you don't get to stop me." She pulled her arm free and walked out into the night. Hayes looked at Brennan. Brennan looked at Hayes. Neither of them said anything. What was there to say? They followed her. Sarah moved through the base like she'd been born to it, not running, flowing, using shadows and debris and burning vehicles for cover. The rifle was an extension of her body, natural, comfortable, the way some people held guitars or paintbrushes. She found a position on the roof of the supply depot, 45-degree angle overlooking the eastern approach, good sight lines, multiple egress routes, the kind of position a professional would choose. Hayes climbed up behind her, watched as she settled into the rifle. Breathing slowed, heartbeat visible in her neck for just a moment, then gone, steady. "How many are there?" he asked. "I count 14 hostiles, 3 already down in the medical wing, 11 active. They're organized into 3 fire teams with 1 command element." Her voice had gone flat, professional, the voice of someone doing math. "Command element is coordinating from the Humvee at grid reference 732-418. Take out the command element and the fire teams lose coordination." "Can you make that shot?" 450 meters. Crosswind at approximately 8 miles per hour. Temperature 72 degrees. Barometric pressure standard. Target is stationary and backlit by vehicle lights. She made minute adjustments to the scope. Yes, I can make the shot. She took the breath, held it. Her finger rested on the trigger with the kind of gentle pressure that came from knowing exactly how much force it took to break the sear without disturbing the sight picture. The rifle fired. 450 meters away, the hostile coordinating squad movements dropped. Sarah had already chambered another round before his body hit the ground. Command structure disrupted. They'll attempt to re-establish leadership. Give them approximately 45 seconds. She was right. 45 seconds later, another hostile moved to the command vehicle, picked up the radio. Sarah's second shot went through the smoke from a burning tire. Impossible visibility, impossible angle. The second hostile went down. They're going to figure out where I am in approximately 2 minutes, Sarah said calmly. When they do, they'll suppress this position with everything they have. We'll need to relocate. She fired 3 more times. 3 more hostiles down. Each shot through a gap in cover that shouldn't have been visible. Each one precise as surgery. Each one eliminating a piece of the enemy command structure. The assault started to falter, squads losing coordination, fire discipline breaking down. The kind of disorganization that happened when the people giving orders suddenly weren't there anymore. Hayes watched her work. No hesitation, no emotion. Just cold, professional competence applied to the problem of keeping people alive by making other people stop breathing. How are you so calm? I'm not calm, I'm focused. There's a difference. She fired again. Another hostile down. Calm is what you feel when nothing's at stake. This is what you do when everything's at stake and there's no room for mistakes. She relocated, found a new position, continued the systematic dismantling of the enemy assault. But then the radio crackled. Hayes radio. Emergency frequency. All units, we have a man down. Lance Corporal Chen, eastern perimeter. Femoral artery hit. He's bleeding out. Sarah's hands stopped moving. Just for a second. Hayes saw something flicker across her face. The first crack in the professional mask. Where is he? Hayes checked the radio. Grid reference 715423. Open ground, no cover. Machine gun nest has him pinned. Sarah looked through the scope, found the position. Hayes saw her jaw tighten. Commander, he's gone. There's no way to reach him without crossing 50 meters of open ground under suppressing fire. How long until he bleeds out? 3 minutes, maybe 4. Sarah set down the rifle, started moving. Hayes grabbed her. What are you doing? That's suicide. She looked at him. For the first time since the assault started, he saw something other than cold professionalism in her eyes. He saw the woman who'd spent 6 years trying to save enough lives to balance the ones she'd taken. He saw someone who'd made a promise to herself and wouldn't break it, even if keeping it killed her. I didn't spend 6 years learning to heal just to watch someone die because I was too scared to help. She pulled free and dropped off the roof. Hayes watched her cross the open ground. 50 meters of kill zone. Machine gun fire tearing up the dirt around her feet. She ran low, serpentine pattern, using every bit of cover that existed and some that didn't. A round grazed her left thigh. She stumbled, didn't stop. She reached Chen, dropped next to him, applied tourniquet with one hand while returning fire with her sidearm with the other. Her hands moved with the same precision she'd shown in the medical ward. Confident, certain. The hands of someone who'd done this in worse situations and refused to let training fail when it mattered most. Stay with me, Marine. That's an order. Chen's eyes were glazed, shock setting in. I'm sorry, ma'am. I screwed up. You did fine. Now shut up and let me work. She got the tourniquet locked, checked the time, started drag extraction, pulled Chen across the same 50 meters she'd just crossed, machine gun fire the entire way, using his body weight and her own as minimal cover, moving with the kind of desperate efficiency that came from knowing every second mattered. They made it to cover, barely. Hayes was there, grabbed Chen, started moving him toward the bunker. Sarah collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, blood seeping through her pant leg where the round had grazed her thigh. Hayes looked at the wound. "You're hit. I'm functional. That needs treatment. It needs to wait." She was already moving again, back toward the supply depot, back toward the rifle. But the situation had changed. The enemy had adapted. They'd found her position, set up suppressing fire. The roof of the supply depot was no longer viable. Sarah scanned the base, looking for options. Her eyes landed on the guard tower, 40 feet tall, fully involved in flames from an earlier rocket strike. Metal groaning, structure compromised. Hayes followed her gaze. "No, that tower won't hold your weight. You'll die before you get the shot off. The tower gives me the angle I need for the machine gun nest that's suppressing the evacuation route. Without that angle, nobody gets out." "Commander, that's suicide." She looked at him, smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her smile since the assault started. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already made the decision and found peace with it. "Staff Sergeant, I've been dead for 6 years. I just forgot to lie down." She started climbing. The tower groaned under her weight. Metal stressed beyond its design limits. Heat warping the structure. Flames licking at the supports. Sarah climbed anyway, hand over hand, ignoring the heat, ignoring the pain in her leg, ignoring the very real possibility that the entire structure would collapse before she reached the top. She made it, barely. The platform swayed, metal screaming. She shouldered the rifle, found the target. Machine gun nest, sandbag fortification. The shooter visible only through a 6-inch gap between bags. The shot was impossible. 87-degree angle, straight down through smoke and flame. Wind unpredictable from the fire. The platform moving under her feet. She took the breath anyway, held it. Her finger found the trigger. The world narrowed to the scope, the target, the space between heartbeats where everything went still. She fired. 400 meters away and 40 feet below, the machine gun went silent. The evacuation route was clear. Sarah started climbing down. The tower groaned, swayed, started to collapse. She jumped the last 15 feet, hit the ground hard, rolled, came up limping but alive. Hayes was running toward her. Behind him, Marines were evacuating through the route she'd just opened, moving fast, moving safe. In the distance, the sound of Apache gunships approaching. Air support, finally. The assault was over. Sarah limped back toward the medical bunker, leg bleeding, hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Face covered in soot and blood that might have been hers or might have been Chen's. Marines stared as she passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They just watched the woman who'd been invisible for 3 weeks and had just saved every one of them. She reached the bunker, sat down next to Chen, checked his vitals with hands that had stopped shaking through sheer force of will. "You'll be fine, Marine. Textbook tourniquet application. You'll walk again. Probably even run." Chen was crying, not from pain, from something else. "You saved my life." Sarah's professional mask cracked, just slightly, just enough to show the woman underneath who'd been trying so hard to save lives that she'd forgotten she was allowed to value her own. "That's the job," she said quietly. Behind her, Colonel Brennan approached. The entire base had gone silent. Even the flames seemed to burn quieter. Sarah tried to stand, failed. Her leg wasn't cooperating anymore. She stayed sitting, tried to salute from that position. Brennan stopped her. "At ease, Commander." Then he did something that made every Marine in sight straighten. He saluted her first. Sarah stared, didn't know what to do, didn't know what this meant. One by one, every Marine in the bunker came to attention. Every single one saluted. Brennan spoke quietly, firmly. with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked. Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart, 73 confirmed kills across 17 operations. And tonight, 31 more confirmed kills in a single engagement to protect this base and everyone on it. He paused. You don't salute us, Commander. We salute you. Sarah's hand came up slowly, returned the salute. Her composure finally cracked. Not much, just enough to show that under all the training and all the competence and all the years of running, there was still a woman who'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. The camera held on her face, the smoke, the blood, the tears she was trying very hard not to let fall. The woman who'd spent 6 years hiding was finally completely, utterly visible. And for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't running anymore. If you've ever hidden parts of yourself because you thought they made you less worthy, this story is for you. Drop a comment and let us know what you thought. And if you want to see how Sarah Bennett transforms from a woman in hiding to a leader who changes everything, hit that subscribe button. Because part 3 is where redemption stops being a dream and becomes a reality. The Apache gunships arrived with the sound of salvation. Their rotors beat the smoke-filled air into submission, and their chain guns made short work of the remaining hostiles, who hadn't already broken contact and disappeared into the desert night. Sarah Bennett sat against the bunker wall, leg bleeding through the field dressing someone had applied, and watched the sky light up with tracer fire that meant the fight was finally over. She'd stopped counting the bodies after 30, stopped caring about the number that would get added to the 73 she already carried. The math didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the Marine sitting next to her who was still breathing because she'd crossed 50 meters of open ground to make sure he kept breathing. Lance Corporal Chen's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "Thank you," he whispered. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. 21 years old, entire life ahead of him. A future that almost ended tonight in the dirt of a foreign country most Americans couldn't find on a map. You did good, Marine. Held pressure on the wound. Stayed conscious. That's what saved you, not me. You're the one who ran through gunfire. Yeah, Sarah's voice cracked slightly, just barely. I guess I did. The bunker entrance filled with movement. Medics coming to take Chen. Colonel Brennan standing in the doorway, backlit by flames. Hayes next to him, face unreadable in the smoke and shadow. But it was the silence that Sarah noticed most. The way every person in that bunker had gone completely still. The way they were all looking at her with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite awe, but existed somewhere in the space between. Brennan stepped forward. His boots crunched on debris. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who just had every assumption he'd made about a person completely shattered. "Commander Bennett, on behalf of everyone on this base, I owe you an apology." Sarah tried to stand. Her leg had other ideas. She stayed sitting. "Sir, you don't owe me anything. I owe you considerably more than an apology. But it's a start." He looked at the assembled Marines, then back at Sarah. "Navy Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart, 17 operations across 4 theaters. And tonight, you single-handedly disrupted a coordinated assault by professional hostiles, saved the life of one of my Marines, and demonstrated the kind of courage under fire that most of these men will never witness in their entire careers." He came to attention, saluted. Sarah's breath caught. Behind Brennan, every Marine in the bunker snapped to attention. Every single one saluted. The gesture rippled through the crowd like a wave. Marines she'd served quietly for 3 weeks. Corpsmen who'd dismissed her suggestions. Nurses who'd thought she was too soft for military medicine. All of them standing at attention. All of them rendering the honor she'd been running from for 6 years. Sarah's hand came up slowly, returned the salute with fingers that trembled just slightly. The professional mask she'd worn for so long cracked down the middle, and what showed through wasn't weakness. It was the simple human reality of someone who'd forgotten what recognition felt like. "You don't salute us, Commander," Brennan said quietly. "We salute you." The words hung in the smoke-filled air. Sarah held the salute for the required 3 seconds, dropped her hand, tried very hard not to let the tears that were building behind her eyes actually fall. She failed. One tear, just one, tracking through the soot and blood on her face. A Marine in the back whispered to the person next to him, "That's the angel of death. I heard stories about her, thought they were myths." Hayes stepped forward, offered his hand. Sarah took it, let him pull her to her feet. Her legs screamed in protest but held. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." Sarah smiled, small, genuine. The first real smile anyone on that base had ever seen from her. "Yeah, I can walk." The medevac helicopters came an hour later. Chen was the first loaded. Sarah insisted on walking him to the bird herself, limping on a leg that probably needed stitches and definitely needed rest. She held his hand the entire way. At the helicopter, Chen looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much in one night. "What you did, running out there, nobody does that. Someone who takes an oath to preserve life does that, whether they're holding a rifle or a scalpel." She squeezed his hand. "You're going to be fine, Marine. You're going to walk again, run again, live a long life. And maybe someday you'll tell your kids about the night you got shot and some crazy lady pulled you out of a kill zone." Chen smiled through tears. "I'll tell them about the night an angel saved my life." Sarah's throat tightened. She nodded once, stepped back, let the crew chief close the door. The helicopter lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, and Sarah stood on the landing pad watching it go. Hayes approached from behind, didn't say anything, just stood next to her in the kind of comfortable silence that existed between people who'd seen each other at their absolute worst and absolute best. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now I get stitches, file an after-action report, probably have a very uncomfortable conversation with someone from the Pentagon about why a contract nurse has level 4 clearance." "That's not what I meant." Sarah looked at him. "I know what you meant." "So?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the horizon where the helicopter had disappeared, thinking about 6 years of running, 6 years of trying to be someone else, 6 years of believing that if she just saved enough lives, the ones she'd taken would stop mattering. "I don't know," she said finally. "I spent 6 years trying to stop being the person I was. Turns out you can't stop being something. You can only integrate it into something bigger." "That sounds like therapy talk." "That's because I've had a lot of therapy." Hayes smiled. "Did it work?" "Ask me after I've had some sleep." The sun rose over Forward Operating Base Medical Station 7 3 hours later. Sarah sat in the medical ward getting her leg stitched by a corpsman who kept looking at her like she might explode into violence at any moment. She let him work in silence, watching the base come alive through the window. The damage from the assault was visible everywhere. Burned-out vehicles, cratered pavement, bullet holes in walls that would need patching. But the people were intact, shaken, traumatized, but alive. That was what mattered. Colonel Brennan appeared in the doorway, knocked on the frame even though the door was open. "Commander, do you have a minute?" Sarah nodded to the corpsman, who took the hint and left. Brennan sat down heavily in the chair across from her. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "I need to apologize properly, not in front of everyone, just you and me." "Sir, you really don't need to." "Yes, I do." He met her eyes. "You told me about the sensor blind spot. I dismissed you. You suggested defensive improvements. I told you to stick to bedpans. And then when the assault came from exactly where you said it would, using exactly the tactics you predicted, you saved lives that I put at risk through my own arrogance." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with a kind of gentleness that came from understanding exactly how it felt to make mistakes that cost lives. "Colonel, you made decisions based on the information you had. You thought I was a contract nurse with delusions of tactical competence. How could you have known I was a former SEAL surgeon with actual tactical experience? You tried to tell me. I tried to suggest improvements. I didn't tell you who I was. That's on me. Why didn't you? Sarah looked down at her hands, the same hands that had held scalpels and rifles with equal competence, the same hands that had saved lives and taken them, the same hands that had been trying very hard to forget they knew how to do both. Because I was ashamed. I killed a 16-year-old kid in Somalia 6 years ago. He had an AK-47 and he was pointing it at a team of SEALs I was responsible for keeping alive. The shot was justified, legal, necessary, and I still see his face every time I close my eyes. She paused. I became a nurse because I thought if I saved enough lives, it would balance the scales. Turns out that's not how it works. The scales don't balance. You just learn to carry the weight. Brennan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what she meant. I've been in command for 17 years. I've made calls that got people killed, sent Marines into situations where I knew some of them wouldn't come back. You learn to live with it, or you eat your gun. There's no third option. How do you live with it? You remember that the alternative was worse. You honor the people you lost by making sure their deaths meant something. And you keep serving until you can't anymore. He looked at her directly. Which brings me to why I'm here. I'm offering you a position. Sarah blinked. Sir? The Marine Corps needs what you have. The ability to heal and fight, to operate and save lives. We've never had a formal program for it. Never prioritized medical personnel who could also serve as combat assets. You could change that. I don't understand. I'm offering you the opportunity to create a new training program. Guardian medics. Specialists who are both healers and protectors. People who can do what you did last night. Who can cross the line between medicine and combat and come back whole. Sarah stared at him. You want me to teach people to be like me? I want you to teach people that the oath to preserve life doesn't end when violence begins. That being a healer and being a warrior aren't mutually exclusive. That sometimes the best way to save lives is to be willing to take them. He leaned forward. You spent 6 years running from who you are. I'm giving you the chance to stop running and start building something that matters. Sarah sat with that for a long moment, thinking about Chen's hand in hers, about the 73 kills she'd carried for 6 years, about the 16-year-old in Somalia who'd been a child soldier with no good choices and a rifle that made him a threat regardless of his age, about the fact that she'd never be able to bring him back, but she could make sure his death wasn't meaningless by teaching others how to make the impossible choices she'd had to make. I'll need complete operational authority, curriculum development, instructor selection, student evaluation. You'll have it. And I'll need you to understand that some of what I teach will make conventional military medicine people very uncomfortable. Because I'm not teaching textbook medicine. I'm teaching field medicine, the kind that keeps people alive when everything's going wrong. I wouldn't expect anything else. Sarah took a breath, let it out slowly, made the decision that would define the next phase of her life. Then yes, sir, I accept. Brennan stood, extended his hand. Sarah shook it. Welcome back to service, Commander. 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom at Marine Corps Combat Development Command in Quantico, Virginia. 20 students sat in front of her, a mix of corpsmen and Force Recon Marines. All of them had volunteered. All of them had passed the preliminary screening. All of them were about to learn that everything they thought they knew about combat medicine was incomplete. She wrote one sentence on the board. The oath to preserve life doesn't end when violence begins. It means you fight harder. Then she turned to face them. My name is Commander Sarah Bennett. I'm a trauma surgeon and a former member of SEAL Team 6, attached to CIA Special Activities Division. Over the next 6 months, I'm going to teach you how to save lives under fire, how to operate while being shot at, how to make the decision between who lives and who dies when you can't save everyone. And most importantly, I'm going to teach you that being a healer and being a warrior aren't opposite things. They're complementary things. She paused. Let that sink in. Some of you are medics who've never fired a weapon in combat. Some of you are Marines who think of medicine as something other people do. By the time we're done, you'll all be both. Questions? A corpsman in the front row raised his hand. Ma'am, is it true you have 73 confirmed kills? 104 now, but who's counting? She smiled slightly. The kills aren't what define me, the saves are. I've kept over 200 people alive in situations where they should have died. That's what matters. The violence is just the tool we use to create the space for healing to happen. Another hand, a Marine in the back. How do you live with it, the killing? Sarah's smile faded. The question deserved an honest answer. You don't live with it. You integrate it. You acknowledge that you did what was necessary to protect lives that mattered to you. You honor the people you killed by making sure their deaths meant something. And you keep serving until you can't anymore, because the alternative is letting their deaths be meaningless. She paused. And you talk to a therapist, regularly. That's not optional in this program. You will all receive psychological support because this job will break you if you try to do it alone. The class went silent, processing that. Sarah picked up a medical kit and a rifle, held them both up. These are your tools. One saves lives, one takes them. You will be expert in both, because in the situations you're going to face, the difference between success and failure is measured in seconds, and seconds are measured in lives. She taught for 3 hours that day, demonstrated how to apply a tourniquet while returning fire, how to call for medevac while clearing a room, how to triage under fire, how to make the impossible decision of who gets treatment first when everyone is dying. After class, Hayes approached. He'd accepted a position as assistant instructor, followed Sarah from the base in Helmand to Quantico because someone needed to make sure she didn't work herself into the ground. You're good at this, he said. I'm good at a lot of things I wish I didn't have to be good at. That's not what I mean. You're good at teaching, at making them understand that this isn't about glory or heroism. It's about service. Sarah looked at the empty classroom, at the rifle and medical kit still sitting on the desk, at the equation she'd written on the board that summed up everything she'd learned in 17 operations and 6 years of running. Someone needed to teach them. Might as well be someone who's made every mistake there is to make. That night, Sarah sat in her quarters at Quantico. The space was small but adequate. Military housing, functional, clean. On her desk sat 2 photographs. The first was old, faded, a Somali village, a reminder of the cost of violence and the weight of necessary choices. The second was new. Lance Corporal Chen with his wife and newborn daughter. The baby was 2 months old. Chen had sent the photo with a note that said, "Her middle name is Sarah, because of the woman who made sure I got to meet her." Sarah looked at both photographs for a long time. The child she'd killed. The child that existed because she'd saved a life. The scales that would never balance but didn't need to balance because that's not how life worked. Next to the photograph sat the locked box, except it wasn't locked anymore. The paracord was untied, the lid open, the contents visible. The Navy Cross citation. The wedding ring she'd worn when she was married to a man who couldn't handle being married to someone who killed people for a living. The spent cartridge that represented everything she'd tried to forget. And something new. A letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps officially establishing the Guardian Medic program and naming Sarah as its founding director. She touched the spent cartridge, not with shame anymore, with acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But this time the words meant something different. Not an apology for survival, an acknowledgement that death had meaning only if the living honored it by serving something bigger than themselves. She stood, walked to the window. Outside, Marines were running morning PT. The sun was rising over Quantico the same way it had risen over Forward Operating Base Medical Station 7 4 months ago. But Sarah wasn't running anymore. She was standing still, building something that mattered, teaching the next generation that strength wasn't about choosing between healing and fighting. It was about integrating both into something greater than either alone. 6 months after that, Sarah stood in the Pentagon briefing room. The Joint Chiefs sat in front of her, flag officers representing every branch of the military, the people who made decisions that affected millions of lives and billions of dollars. She was terrified, and she didn't let it show. The presentation lasted 45 minutes. Statistics on combat casualty survival rates, data on the effectiveness of medics who could also fight, testimonials from students who'd graduated the Guardian Medic program, video footage of training exercises that demonstrated capabilities most conventional military medicine couldn't touch. When she finished, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs leaned forward. "Commander Bennett, what you're proposing represents a fundamental shift in how we think about combat medicine. Some would say it's dangerous to train medics to be warriors." Sarah met his eyes without flinching. "Sir, with respect, what's dangerous is sending medics into combat zones and expecting them to save lives while being unable to protect themselves or their patients. What I'm proposing isn't radical. It's recognition of reality. The battlefield doesn't care about the Geneva Convention. Hostiles don't stop shooting because you're wearing a red cross. The choice isn't between healers and warriors. It's between people who can do both and people who die trying to do one." Silence. Then the chairman smiled. "How soon can you scale the program?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Give me 2 years and full funding. I'll give you a doctrine change that saves lives across every theater of operation." "You have both." 2 years later, Sarah stood on the same perimeter she'd run as a contract nurse, trying to hide from herself. Forward Operating Base Medical Station 7. Except she wasn't hiding anymore. She was running with a squad of Guardian medics, 10 men and women who'd graduated the program, who could heal and fight with equal competence, who understood that the oath to preserve life didn't end when violence began. They ran at 04:45, perfect cadence, professional discipline, the kind of precision that came from training under someone who'd done this when it mattered most. At exactly 3.2 miles, Sarah stopped. The squad stopped with her. "Good run," she said. "Hit the showers, briefing at 0600. They dispersed. Sarah stood alone on the perimeter, watching the sun rise over the same mountain she'd watched 4 years ago, when she was still pretending to be someone else. Hayes approached from behind. He'd made the rank of gunnery sergeant. Followed Sarah through every evolution of the program because someone needed to make sure she remembered to sleep occasionally. "You thinking about the old days?" he asked. "Thinking about how much has changed." "You changed it. We changed it." She looked at him. "None of this works without people willing to do the hard thing. You did the hard thing by believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You saved my life once, in Kunar Valley, 2015. I was one of those SEALs you pulled out. Figured it was time to return the favor." Sarah stared at him. "You never told me that." "You never asked." He smiled. "The angel of death saved my life. Least I could do was make sure she saved her own." Sarah's throat tightened. She nodded once. Couldn't trust her voice to say anything else. They stood together on the perimeter, watching the sunrise. Two people who'd seen the worst of combat and chosen to build something better from the wreckage. That afternoon, Sarah sat in her quarters. The locked box sat on her desk, still open, still visible, but integrated now into the larger story of who she was. The Navy Cross displayed on the wall next to her nursing credentials. The two photographs side by side, the Somali village, Chen's daughter, death and life. The scales that didn't balance but didn't need to balance because that wasn't the point. The point was service, purpose, the understanding that being complex didn't make you broken, it made you complete. She picked up a pen, started writing a letter to the 16-year-old's family. She'd been writing it for 6 years, never sent it, probably never would. But the act of writing helped. It started the same way it always started. I'm sorry I killed your son. He was a child. He deserved a chance at life that I took from him. But I want you to know that his death wasn't meaningless. I've spent 6 years trying to honor him by saving lives, by teaching others how to navigate the impossible choices I had to navigate, by building something that might prevent other families from losing their children to violence. It doesn't bring him back. Nothing will. But I hope it means something. She signed it the same way she always signed it, with her full name and rank, with acknowledgement of who she was and what she'd done. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bennett, trauma surgeon, Guardian Medic Program Director, someone who'd learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about integrating it into a future that honored both the lives taken and the lives saved. She folded the letter, put it in the drawer with the other 63 letters she'd written and never sent. Someday she might send them. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe the act of writing was enough. The acknowledgement that the boy mattered, that his death mattered, that she would carry him for the rest of her life not as punishment, but as responsibility. She stood, walked to the window. Outside, her students were running drills, practicing the integration of healing and fighting that she'd spent 4 years teaching them. They called her Commander now, not LT, not the quiet nurse. Commander Bennett, the woman who'd proven that strength wasn't about being simple. It was about being complex, about holding multiple truths at once and not letting the contradiction destroy you. She smiled, small, genuine, the kind of smile that came from knowing exactly who you were and being at peace with it. The sun set over Forward Operating Base Medical Station 7. Sarah watched it go, not running anymore, not hiding, just standing in the space between healing and fighting and understanding that both were necessary, both were noble, both were her. The oath to preserve life didn't end when violence began. It meant you fought harder. And Sarah Bennett had finally stopped running long enough to understand what that meant. Have you ever known someone who carried more than they showed? Someone who integrated their complexity into strength instead of letting it break them? Share this story with them. And if Sarah's journey from hiding to healing meant something to you, we'd be honored if you subscribed. Because stories like this remind us that redemption isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming fully yourself.